A 32-year-old woman goes missing. After an extensive police search, her body is found. It's been dismembered into 7 different pieces. Some of it is found in the back streets of a city, the rest in nearby woodland. And yet, for this young woman, there have been no big demonstrations, no torchlit parades, no anti-police protests, no demands that men have to change their ways and change their behaviour. In fact, you've never ever heard of her name. Her name is Lorraine Cox, and she went missing in Exeter last September. A woman of a similar age called Sarah Everard went missing, of course, on Clapham Common. The body has been found. She was murdered. And of course, we know the man that's been arrested is Wayne Couzens. Not that any of us should prejudge what goes on in a trial in court. But why is it that one case is major national news and will lead undoubtedly to more legislation, when the other, very similar case, hasn't even touched the radar screen? Well, I'm going to speculate why. The first is that Sarah went missing in London and Lorraine went missing in Exeter. And our media focus is so London-centric that things that happen in London seem to matter more than what goes on out in the provinces. But there's a deeper part to this story. The person that was arrested and is going through a trial at this moment in time gave his name to the police as Christopher Mayer, but that wasn't his name. That was a false name. It was actually Azum Mangori, and he was a failed asylum seeker who'd come to this country from Iraq. As I say, I'm not prejudging either of these cases, and we've got to be very careful not to do that. But I think, frankly, that for those that have been behind many of these demonstrations, ongoing demonstrations, a male, a white male in his 40s with a shaved head was in many ways the ideal person for them to be seen to be protesting against, and even better for those who wanted to make political capital out of Sarah Everard's death. He was a serving police officer. The other, of course, it would have been for many on the Marxist side of politics too difficult and too inconvenient to point out who Azum Mangari actually was. I agree with Helena Edwards, who was at university with Sarah, who said she was thinking of going to the vigil on Clapham Common, but decided not to because she felt it had been hijacked. As she says, Sarah's murder was caused by the appallingly bad act of one individual. It wasn't the fault of all men. It wasn't the fault of all the police. And these demonstrations keep going, and they're turning into anti-police demonstrations. And the newspapers wall to wall have been critical of the way the police behaved in Clapham. Political leaders critical of the way the police have acted. This is now becoming an anti-police campaign. And behind it all are exactly the same people who were behind the protests after the death of George Floyd. Remember, they said it was about racial justice after George Floyd had died. But actually we know that the Black Lives Matter protest was a deeply Marxist organisation intent on defunding the police and bringing down Western society, bringing down capitalism, bringing down the whole world and its structure as we know it. And the same thing is happening here. This, and Helena Edwards is right, this has been hijacked. It's the same people as last time. It is a Marxist, it's now been taken over by Marxists, intent on fighting this big campaign against the police. Overnight, and you won't have heard this on the media, overnight, Churchill's statue was defaced again. The word racist written all over it. Overnight, an RAF memorial in London was defaced with anti-police slogans. And I just want to appeal to newspapers and to politicians and to simply say this. I'm as critical of the police at times as anybody. 3 times during lockdown, the police have knocked on my door asking me why I was going about my business when I was actually working. I don't think Cressida Dick is fit for purpose as head of the Met. I think the way, after the Carl Beach allegations, the way that people's reputations, senior figures in this country, the way their reputations were impugned was dreadful. But I might be critical of individual actions or individual officers in the police force, but I know the vast majority of men and women serving in our police forces are doing their absolute level best to maintain law and order on our streets, and their morale is sinking to a low. We must not allow the horrible murder on Clapham Common to be turned into an anti-police movement, and frankly, an anti-men movement too. And the death and murder of somebody on Clapham Common is exactly the same and equivalent to that of Lorraine Cox, who died last September in Exeter. We've got to wake up to the fact we are being played by the left-wing Marxists again and again and again, and the effect of all of this is very corrosive on society. So please, newspapers, politicians, criticise the police, but don't play along with this defund the police agenda.